Aurora Heights understood the psychology of its residents better than they understood themselves. The building was designed not merely to house the wealthy, but to shape them, mold them, remind them constantly of their place in a hierarchy of class and ambition. Every amenity existed for a reason. Every floor had its purpose, and floor 28 served as the temple where discipline was worshipped and bodies became monuments to willpower. The private gym stretched across the entire eastern wing, a cathedral of chrome and rubber, floor-to-ceiling windows, offering an unobstructed view of Elysium City below. At 6 a.m, the city was still half asleep, wrapped in dawn's pale gold light. But inside the gym, the elite were already awake, already performing the rituals that separated them from ordinary mortals. They came here to sweat out indulgence, to punish themselves for pleasures they would inevitably repeat. They came to see and be seen, to measure themselves against their neighbors in ways that transcended simple wealth. Isla Monroe had been coming to the gym every morning for 3 weeks. Not because she enjoyed it. She had never been someone who found peace in physical exhaustion, but because she needed it. After everything that had happened on floor 32, after the quiet devastation of discovering that love could be packaged and sold like any other commodity in Aurora Heights, she had needed something to anchor her, something predictable, something she could control. So she came early, before the gym filled with the beautiful people who treated exercise like performance art. She wore simple black leggings and an oversized shirt, kept her hair pulled back, wore no makeup. She wanted to disappear into the routine, to become invisible through repetition. Treadmill for 30 minutes, weights for 20, stretching, shower, leave before the floor became crowded with egos and agendas. For 17 days, the strategy worked perfectly. On the 18th day, Victor Van Seren walked into the gym at 6:15 in the morning, and everything changed. Isla noticed him immediately, though she pretended not to. Everyone noticed Victor. He was the kind of man who commanded attention simply by existing, not through obvious displays of power, but through the quiet certainty that power was his birthright. Tall, impeccably built, with dark hair and features that suggested both aristocratic breeding and something more dangerous lurking beneath the surface. He moved through Aurora Heights like a king surveying his kingdom, which in many ways he was. The Van Seren family didn't just own the building. They owned the concept of the building, the mythology of it. Victor's grandfather had commissioned its construction. His father had transformed it into a symbol of untouchable luxury. And Victor, as the heir apparent, embodied everything Aurora Heights represented: privilege without apology, power without pretense, and a belief that the world existed to satisfy his desires. Isla had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. He lived in the penthouse, attended every important event, moved through the building's social ecosystem like a shark through water, effortless, dangerous, always in motion. But she had never been close enough to matter to him, and she had preferred it that way. She had learned the hard way that proximity to power in Aurora Heights came with costs she was no longer willing to pay. But now he was here, in her sanctuary, invading the one space she had claimed as neutral territory. He didn't acknowledge her directly. That would have been too obvious, too crude for someone of Victor's caliber. Instead, he chose a treadmill 2 machines away from hers, positioned perfectly, so that if either of them glanced at the mirrored wall ahead, they would catch the other's reflection. He set his pace slightly faster than hers, his breathing controlled and steady, his focus apparently absolute. Isla told herself it was coincidence. Rich people had unpredictable schedules. Maybe he'd had an early meeting. Maybe his usual workout time had been disrupted. It didn't mean anything. She increased her speed slightly, focusing on the rhythm of her feet against the belt, the burn beginning in her calves and thighs. She kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral, her awareness completely, and utterly fixed on the man 2 machines away. 20 minutes passed. Neither spoke. Neither acknowledged the other. But the air between them hummed with an electricity that had nothing to do with the equipment. When Isla finished her run and moved to the weight section, Victor finished his exactly 3 minutes later. When she selected dumbbells, he positioned himself at a bench within her line of sight. When she moved to the mat for stretching, he claimed the space adjacent to hers, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated, like everything else about him. Finally, as she was rolling up her mat, he spoke. "You're very disciplined." His voice was exactly what she expected. Smooth, cultured, with an undertone of amusement that suggested he found the entire world slightly entertaining. Isla looked at him directly for the first time. Up close, Victor Van Seren was even more compelling than from a distance. His eyes were dark, almost black, but with flecks of amber that caught the light. His face was all strong angles and perfect symmetry, the kind of masculine beauty that appeared effortless, but likely required considerable maintenance. There was a small scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible, the only imperfection she could detect. "Is that an observation or a judgment?" she asked. "An observation," Victor said, his mouth curving slightly. "Though I'm curious, what makes you think it might be a judgment? People in this building don't usually notice discipline unless they're comparing it to something else." Fair point. He stepped closer, not invasively, but enough to shift the dynamic from public space to private conversation. "I've seen you here every morning for weeks. Same time, same routine, same determined expression. It's impressive." "Or obsessive," Isla said. "There's a fine line between the two, especially here." She wanted to walk away. Every instinct told her to end this conversation, to maintain the boundaries she had worked so hard to establish. But there was something in his tone, a suggestion of understanding rather than judgment, that made her pause. "Why are you here?" she asked. "This isn't your usual time." Victor's smile widened slightly. "You've been paying attention. Everyone pays attention to you. That's how you've designed your life. True, he acknowledged without embarrassment. But most people pretend they haven't noticed. You're more direct. I've found that pretense is exhausting. Also fair. He shifted his weight, the movement casual, but somehow still precise. To answer your question, I needed a change. My usual routine was becoming predictable, and predictability is dangerous. Dangerous how? When people know your patterns, they know how to find you, how to anticipate you, how to use you. He paused. I assume you understand something about that. Isla felt the observation land like a gentle blade between her ribs. He knew something about her situation, or at least suspected. In Aurora Heights, personal disasters were never truly private. The building had too many eyes, too many interests, too many people who traded information like currency. I should go, she said, picking up her mat. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't. Then why are you leaving? She met his eyes again, and this time she let him see the truth. Because conversations in this building are never just conversations. They're investments, and I'm not looking for investors. Victor studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling sensation of being truly seen, not as an object of desire or a potential conquest, but as a person whose defenses he recognized because they mirrored his own. Understood, he said finally. But for what it's worth, some of us are just looking for honest conversation. Those are surprisingly rare here. Isla nodded, not trusting herself to respond, and walked toward the women's locker room. She could feel his gaze following her, not predatory, but curious, and that somehow felt more dangerous than simple attraction. She didn't look back. Part 2, Patterns and Perception. Victor Van Seren was not accustomed to being dismissed. It wasn't that women didn't reject him. He was sophisticated enough to understand that even his wealth and status didn't guarantee universal appeal. But rejections were usually gentle, apologetic, wrapped in social niceties that preserved everyone's dignity. They were never as direct as Isla Monroe's cool assessment and immediate departure. That directness intrigued him. He had noticed her weeks ago, long before he'd started coming to the gym at dawn. She was hard not to notice, despite her obvious attempts at invisibility. Isla possessed a quality that existed beyond conventional beauty. Though she was certainly beautiful, a softness in her features that suggested vulnerability, combined with something steely in her carriage that warned against assuming that vulnerability was weakness. She moved through Aurora Heights like someone who had learned its rules and decided they didn't apply to her anymore. Victor knew her story, or at least the version that circulated through the building's gossip networks. She had been involved with someone on floor 32, a finance executive with a reputation for collecting beautiful things. The relationship had ended badly, publicly enough to be noticed, but privately enough that details remained scarce. Isla had emerged from it changed, harder, more guarded. building loved stories like that. They confirmed its essential nature. Aurora Heights was a place where desire and ambition collided, where beauty was currency, and everyone was for sale if you found the right price. But Isla seemed determined to prove that narrative wrong, and Victor found that fascinating. So he kept coming to the gym at 6:15. Not every morning, that would have been too obvious, but 3 or 4 times a week. Enough to establish a pattern without seeming obsessive. Enough to create opportunities for proximity without forcing interaction. For the first week, Isla maintained her careful distance. She acknowledged him with brief nods, nothing more. She structured her routine to minimize overlap, choosing equipment on the opposite side of the gym, timing her sessions to reduce the chances of coincidence. Victor respected the boundaries while quietly undermining them. He learned her patterns, which machines she preferred, how long she spent in each section, the exact angle of her body when she was truly focused versus when she was merely performing focus. He began to position himself in her peripheral vision, close enough to be noticed, but far enough to avoid intrusion. He was playing a game, and he knew it. But it was a game with stakes he hadn't fully identified yet. The first real conversation happened on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after their initial exchange. Isla was struggling with a weight machine, trying to adjust the settings with visible frustration. Victor watched for 30 seconds, long enough to confirm she genuinely needed help, short enough to avoid seeming predatory before approaching. "The pin tends to stick," he said, gesturing to the mechanism. "You have to pull it out completely before adjusting." Isla looked at him, then at the machine, clearly weighing whether accepting help violated her careful neutrality. "Thank you," she said finally, stepping back to give him access. Victor made the adjustment smoothly, his fingers finding the sticky pin with practiced ease. "They've been meaning to replace this equipment for months. But you know how it is, complaining about gym equipment in a building like this feels absurd." "Everything feels absurd in this building," Isla said. He glanced at her, caught off guard by the honesty. "You're not happy here." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Isla settled into the machine, testing the adjustment. "Why do you care whether I'm happy?" "I'm not sure I do," Victor admitted. "But I'm curious about you." Curiosity in Aurora Heights is usually a prelude to something else. "Usually," he agreed, "but not always." She began her set, her movements controlled and precise, her expression focused. Victor should have walked away. The conversation had reached its natural conclusion, and lingering would seem desperate. But he found himself staying, watching the play of muscles in her shoulders, the concentration in her face. When she finished, she looked at him with something close to exasperation. "Are you going to watch my entire workout? Would you prefer I didn't?" "I'd prefer to understand what you want." Victor considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I'm not sure yet, but I know I find you interesting, and interesting people are rare in this building." "I'm not interesting," Isla said. "I'm just trying to maintain some privacy. In Aurora Heights, that might be the most interesting thing about you." Despite herself, Isla almost smiled. The expression transformed her face, softening the careful guardedness, revealing a warmth she usually kept hidden. It lasted only a second before she controlled it, but Victor had seen it, and the glimpse made him want to see it again. "I have to finish my routine," Isla said. "Of course," but as he walked away, Victor knew the dynamic had shifted. The wall between them had developed a crack, small but significant. And in a building where perception shaped reality, even small cracks could become catastrophes or opportunities. He hadn't decided which yet. Part 3. The weight of observation. Serena Cho noticed them first. As an art curator trained to read composition and subtext, she understood that meaning lived in negative space, in what wasn't said or shown. And when she arrived at the gym at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning and saw Isla Monroe and Victor Van Seren occupying adjacent spaces with the careful precision of people pretending not to be aware of each other, she recognized the composition immediately. Attraction disguised as indifference, curiosity masked as routine. The oldest story Aurora Heights knew how to tell. Serena didn't mention it to anyone immediately. She simply filed the observation away, the way she cataloged everything in the building, a habit born from years of understanding that information in Aurora Heights was a form of art, valuable precisely because of its potential for reinterpretation. But she wasn't the only one who noticed. Jackson Rains mentioned it to Mara Solis during a casual encounter in the tower's coffee shop. "Have you seen Van Seren in the gym lately? He's suddenly very dedicated to morning workouts." Mara, who paid attention to patterns of desire, the way others tracked stock prices, raised an eyebrow. And he's always near Isla Monroe, not obviously, but near. Mara's interest sharpened. She liked Isla, admired her quiet strength after the disaster on floor 32. "Does she seem interested?" "Hard to tell. You know how she is controlled. But she doesn't leave when he shows up. That's not the same as interested. In this building, it's close enough." The observation rippled outward through the building's social networks, passed along in elevators and hallways, discussed over wine in penthouses, and whispered about in the lobby. Not maliciously, exactly. Aurora Heights residents didn't need malice to gossip. They simply needed entertainment, and the prospect of Victor Van Seren pursuing someone who seemed genuinely disinterested was entertainment of the highest order. The rumors reached Isla within a week. She heard about it from her neighbor, a kind but gossipy woman who seemed to believe she was being helpful. "I just thought you should know people are talking about you and Victor Van Seren. The gym thing." Isla felt ice slide down her spine. "There's no gym thing. I know that. But you know how people are. They see patterns, they create stories. The neighbor smiled sympathetically. Just be careful. Victor's family doesn't like complications, and I'm what? Visible now, whether you want to be or not. After the conversation, Isla stood in her apartment, staring out at the city, feeling the familiar rage of being reduced to narrative without her consent. She had worked so hard to become invisible again, to erase herself from the building's attention. And now, because of a few coincidental encounters and Victor Van Seren's apparent inability to find another gym in the entire city, she was becoming a story again. She decided to confront him. The next morning, she arrived at the gym at 6 sharp, earlier than usual, and positioned herself where he would have to see her immediately upon entering. When Victor walked in at 6:15, his expression shifted from surprise to understanding in less than a second. He approached her directly. "You look angry. People are talking about us." "I know. You know," Isla's voice was sharp. "And you don't care." "I didn't say I don't care. I said I know." Victor's tone remained calm, but she could see tension in his shoulders. "People in this building talk. It's what they do. It doesn't mean anything. It means something to me. I didn't move here to become entertainment. Neither did I. Then why do you keep coming here? Why do you keep," she gestured vaguely between them, "creating situations that people can misinterpret?" Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because I enjoy talking to you. Because you're one of the few people in this building who treats me like a person instead of a symbol. And because I thought you might enjoy it too, despite your determination to pretend otherwise." The honesty caught Isla off guard. She had expected deflection, maybe arrogance, possibly an apology wrapped in privilege. She hadn't expected vulnerability. "What I enjoy is irrelevant," she said, though with less conviction. "The cost of being associated with you is too high. Associated with me. We've had maybe 5 conversations. 5 conversations in Aurora Heights is practically a relationship. You know that." Victor's jaw tightened. "So what are you suggesting? That we stop talking? Start coming to the gym at different times? Pretend we don't exist to each other?" "Yes, because of gossip. Because I've been through this before. I've been the subject of rumors in this building, and I know how it ends. With me diminished, reduced to someone's accessory or cautionary tale. I won't do that again." For a long moment, Victor said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more serious. "I understand protecting yourself, but you're giving other people power over your choices. You're letting their perception dictate your behavior. That's called survival in Aurora Heights. That's called surrender." The word hung between them, sharp and challenging. Isla wanted to argue, to defend her position, but something in Victor's expression stopped her. He wasn't mocking her. He was genuinely disappointed, and that disappointment felt more intimate than anything else that had passed between them. "I should go," Isla said. That seems to be your default response. It served me well. Has it? Victor asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just as trapped as everyone else in this building. You've just convinced yourself the cage is your choice. Isla left without responding, her heart pounding with anger and something uncomfortably close to recognition. She hated that he'd gotten under her skin, hated that his words echoed thoughts she'd been trying to suppress for months. Most of all, she hated that part of her wanted to go back and continue the conversation, to see where honesty might lead in a building constructed entirely on beautiful lies. But she kept walking, because walking away was still the only power she was certain she possessed. Part 4. Strategic adjustments. Victor didn't go to the gym the next morning, or the morning after that. He told himself it was strategic, giving Isla space, allowing the rumors to settle, demonstrating that he could be reasonable. But the truth was more complicated. Her words had landed with unexpected force, challenging assumptions he hadn't realized he held. He had spent his entire life in Aurora Heights, had grown up understanding its rules as naturally as breathing. He knew how to navigate its social complexities, how to use perception as a tool, how to transform gossip into advantage. He had never questioned the system because the system had always worked in his favor. But Isla had questioned it, had rejected the premise that visibility equaled power, that being discussed meant being relevant. She had chosen invisibility as resistance, and Victor found himself respecting that choice even as he disagreed with it. Still, he stayed away from the gym. Instead, he redirected his energy into work, meetings with investors, strategic planning for the tower's expansion, family obligations that required his presence, and political maneuvering. He threw himself into the performance of being Victor Van Seren, heir to Aurora Heights, man of power and precision. It should have been enough. It had always been enough before. But he found himself distracted during meetings, his mind wandering to the image of Isla on the treadmill, focused and determined, building strength through repetition. He found himself analyzing their conversations, the layers of meaning beneath her careful words, the glimpses of vulnerability she allowed before reasserting control. He realized, with something close to alarm, that he was actually interested in her, not as a conquest or a distraction, but as a person he wanted to know, whose thoughts mattered, whose respect he valued. It was an unfamiliar feeling, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do with it. Meanwhile, the rumors began to shift. Without new material, no more sightings, no dramatic confrontations, the gossip evolved. Some residents decided the whole thing had been imagined, a brief alignment of schedules, misread as attraction. Others claimed to have insider knowledge of a secret relationship, though details varied wildly depending on the source. Elias Gray, the concierge, watched the rumors evolve with professional detachment. He knew more than most about the actual interactions between Victor and Isla, their schedules, their patterns, the body language visible through the gym's glass walls. He also knew that truth and narrative rarely aligned in Aurora Heights, and that his job was to remember both without confusing them. When Victor approached him one afternoon, Elias was unsurprised. "I need information," Victor said quietly. They were standing in a service corridor, away from the lobby's surveillance and the residents' curious eyes. "About Isla Monroe. What happened on floor 32. Elias studied him carefully. "That's personal information." "I know, but I need to understand context." "Why?" It was an impertinent question from a concierge to a Van Seren. But Elias had never been particularly concerned with propriety when it conflicted with wisdom. Victor could have him fired with a phone call, but they both knew he wouldn't. Elias was too valuable, too knowledgeable, too skilled at managing the building's delicate ecosystem. "Because I care about her privacy as much as she does," Victor said. "And I need to know what I'm asking her to risk." Elias considered this for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and factual. "She was involved with Marcus Hendricks, investment banker, floor 32. Relationship lasted 8 months. It ended when she discovered he was engaged to someone else the entire time. The fiancé was from outside the building, part of his other life. Isla was the secret. When she confronted him, he offered her money for discretion. She refused and moved to a different floor." Victor felt anger tighten his chest. Did people know? Some suspected. Most didn't care. Marcus's reputation survived intact. Isla's didn't. Why not? Because he was powerful and she was beautiful. The building decided she should have known better, should have been smarter, should have protected herself. Elias' expression remained neutral, but his tone carried the faintest edge of judgment, not of Isla, but of the system that had failed her. "That's grotesque," Victor said. "That's Aurora Heights." Victor stood in silence, processing. He understood now why Isla had been so determined to remain invisible, why the prospect of new rumors had triggered such a visceral response. She had already been consumed by the building's narrative machinery once. She had every reason to resist being fed into it again. "Thank you," Victor said finally. "Are you going to pursue her anyway?" Elias asked. It was another impertinent question, but Victor answered honestly. "I don't know. Maybe the kind thing to do is leave her alone." "Maybe," Elias agreed. "Or maybe the kind thing is to give her the choice instead of making it for her." Victor looked at the concierge sharply. "You think she wants me to pursue her? I think she wants to make her own decisions without the building making them for her. There's a difference between protecting someone and deciding what they can handle." The observation struck deep. Victor nodded slowly, filing the wisdom away, and walked back toward the elevator. Elias watched him go, already knowing how this story would unfold. He had seen it dozens of times in Aurora Heights, attraction complicated by power, desire tangled with risk. Two people trying to find authenticity in a building constructed on performance. Sometimes it ended in disaster. Sometimes it ended in something like happiness, but it always ended in change. Part 5. The photograph. The photograph appeared on a Wednesday morning, circulated through a private social media group frequented by Aurora Heights residents. It showed two people in the gym, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A man and a woman, close together, but not touching, caught in what appeared to be an intense conversation. The quality was grainy, taken from a distance, probably from another floor. But the subjects were identifiable enough. Victor Van Seren and Isla Monroe, frozen in a moment that suggested intimacy, whether or not intimacy actually existed. The accompanying text was brief. Interesting gym partnership on 28. Wonder how long before the membership expands. The post spread quickly, shared and screenshotted, discussed in group chats and private messages. By noon, nearly everyone in the building had seen it. By evening, it had generated dozens of interpretations, each more elaborate than the last. Isla learned about it from Mara, who showed up at her door with wine and anger. "This is bullshit," Mara said, pushing past Isla into the apartment. "Complete bullshit." "What is?" Mara pulled out her phone, showing Isla the photograph. "This. Someone's spreading this around, making it seem like you and Victor are sneaking around." Isla felt her stomach drop. The image itself was innocuous. They were just talking, fully clothed, in a public space. But she remembered the conversation it captured, the moment when Victor had stepped closer, when the air between them had charged with something electric and dangerous. The camera had caught that charge, even if it couldn't capture the words. "Who posted it?" Isla asked, her voice tight. "Anonymous account, but someone deliberate. Someone who knew where to aim the camera and when." Mara's expression was fierce. "This isn't random gossip, Isla. This is targeting. Targeting me or Victor. Does it matter? You're both in the frame." Isla sat down slowly, staring at the image. She felt violated, exposed, reduced once again to spectacle. But beneath the violation was something else, a cold, calculating fury. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had watched her, waited for the right moment, crafted a narrative designed to damage. "I need to talk to Victor," she said. "Do you think he knows?" "If the entire building knows, he knows." Isla was right. Victor called her 20 minutes later, his voice controlled but vibrating with suppressed anger. "I assume you've seen it." "Yes." "I'm sorry. This is my fault." "How is it your fault?" "Because people watch me. I should have been more careful, should have anticipated this." "We were talking in a gym," Isla said. "We weren't doing anything wrong. In Aurora Heights, perception is more important than reality. You know that. I'm tired of that being true." There was a pause. When Victor spoke again, his voice was different, less controlled, more raw. "So am I. Do you know who posted it? Not yet, but I will. And then what? I make sure they understand that targeting you was a mistake. The protective edge in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through Isla's chest. She pushed it aside, focusing on practicality. That might make it worse, might confirm whatever story they're trying to tell. I don't care. Victor, no, listen to me. His intensity was almost physical, transmitted through the phone like electricity. I've spent my entire life managing perception, playing the games this building requires. I'm very good at it. But I'm tired, Isla. I'm tired of every conversation being strategic, every relationship being transactional. You're the first person I've talked to in years who feels real, and I won't let someone weaponize that. Isla closed her eyes, feeling the walls she'd constructed begin to crack. This is exactly what I was afraid of. This scrutiny, this exposure. I know. So what do we do? That's your choice, Victor said. I can handle this quietly, find who posted it, make it clear there are consequences for invasive behavior. Let the whole thing fade. We never speak again. You go back to invisible. I go back to performing. Or we stop pretending. Stop letting them control the narrative. Be visible on our terms instead of theirs. That's easy for you to say. You're a Van Seren. Visibility is your currency. It's also my prison, Victor said quietly. But I think it might be worth it with the right person. Isla's heart was pounding. Every rational part of her brain screamed to refuse, to choose safety, to retreat. But she thought about what Victor had said in the gym days earlier, about surrender disguised as survival, about giving others power over her choices. I need time to think, she said. Of course, but Isla, yes, whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But please decide based on what you want, not what you're afraid of. After he hung up, Isla sat in her apartment, looking out at the city lights beginning to glow as evening settled over Elysium. Mara had left the wine, and Isla poured herself a glass, thinking about fear and desire, safety and risk, the careful life she'd built, and the one she might actually want. The photograph was still on her phone. She studied it, trying to see it objectively. Two people talking, nothing scandalous, nothing shameful, just conversation and chemistry, translated through distance into innuendo. But the chemistry was real. She couldn't deny that anymore. The question was whether admitting it was worth the cost. Part 6. Investigation and investment. Victor didn't wait for Isla's decision to begin his investigation. By the next morning, he had called in several favors, spoken to building security, and initiated a quiet review of surveillance footage and resident access patterns. What he discovered made him colder than he'd felt in years. The photograph had been taken from floor 32. The angle was precise, deliberately chosen to capture maximum ambiguity. And the anonymous account that posted it had been created specifically for this purpose. Used once, then abandoned. But the digital trail led somewhere. It always did. Marcus Hendricks, the same man who had treated Isla as a secret, who had offered her money for silence, who had emerged from their relationship with his reputation intact while hers suffered. Victor sat in his penthouse office, looking at the evidence his security consultant had compiled, feeling rage settle into something focused and purposeful. This wasn't random gossip. This was revenge, or intimidation, or some toxic combination of both. Marcus had seen Victor's interest in Isla and decided to remind her, and anyone watching, of her place in Aurora Heights' hierarchy. It was calculated, it was cruel, and it would have consequences. Victor made 3 calls. The first was to his attorney, initiating a cease and desist order based on privacy violations and harassment. The second was to building management, requesting a review of Marcus Hendricks' lease and compliance with community guidelines. The third was to his father. Jonathan Van Seren listened to the situation with the detached professionalism of a man who had spent decades managing crises. When Victor finished, his father was quiet for a moment. "This woman means something to you," Jonathan said. It wasn't a question. Yes, enough to create conflict with a resident who has significant financial relationships with several of our key investors. Yes, another pause. Then, all right, I'll make some calls. Hendricks will receive a message. But Victor, I know what you're going to say. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. His father's voice softened slightly. I'm going to say be careful. Not because I disapprove, but because genuine feeling in this building is dangerous. It makes you vulnerable. It gives people leverage. I understand. I hope you do. But I also hope you pursue it anyway. Your mother and I, we built something real in the middle of all this performance. It's possible, just difficult. After the call, Victor sat in the fading afternoon light, surprised by his father's support and troubled by the warning. He had always known that emotion was a liability in Aurora Heights. He had structured his life around that knowledge, kept relationships superficial, maintained careful distance. But Isla had slipped through those defenses, and now he was exposed in ways he hadn't anticipated. He called her that evening. I know who posted the photograph, he said. He heard her sharp intake of breath. Marcus, how did you know? Because it's exactly the kind of thing he would do. Punitive, controlling, designed to remind me I'm not allowed to move on. Her voice was bitter. Did you confront him? Not directly, but he'll receive messages from several directions: legal, financial, social. By tomorrow, he'll understand that targeting you was a profound miscalculation. Victor, I know what you're going to say. That I shouldn't have gotten involved, that you can fight your own battles. And you're right, you can. But you shouldn't have to, not alone. That's not what I was going to say. What were you going to say? Thank you. Her voice was soft, almost vulnerable. I've spent months trying to handle everything myself, trying to prove I don't need anyone. It's exhausting. So thank you for caring enough to help. Victor felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. You're welcome. But Isla, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity or white knight syndrome. I'm not trying to rescue you. Then what are you trying to do? I'm trying to be honest with you about how I feel, which is terrified and exhilarated and more alive than I've felt in memory. You challenge me. You see through the performance. You treat me like someone worth knowing beyond my name. And I want more of that. More conversations. More mornings. More reality. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the unspoken complications of Aurora Heights, the surveillance, the gossip, the social calculations, the risk. Finally, Isla spoke. I'm afraid. Of what? Of getting hurt again. Of becoming a story instead of a person. Of losing myself in someone else's narrative. Those are reasonable fears. But fear is just information. It tells you what matters, what's worth protecting. It doesn't have to be a decision. What would the decision be? To try, Victor said simply. Not publicly, not as performance. Just honestly. To see if what we feel in private can survive the building's scrutiny. To be visible on our terms. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll have tried something real in a building full of beautiful fakes. Isla laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. That's either very romantic or very naive. Probably both. When did you become so honest? About 3 weeks ago. In a gym, talking to someone who refused to be impressed by anything except authenticity. Another silence. But this one felt different, warmer, more possibility than hesitation. Okay, Isla said. Okay, let's try. Carefully, honestly, on our terms. Victor felt relief flood through him, followed immediately by the weight of responsibility. He had asked for this, had pursued it, had protected her from Marcus's petty cruelty. Now, he had to prove it was worth the risk. Can I take you to dinner? He asked. Somewhere outside the building, away from Aurora Heights and its eyes. That sounds perfect. Tomorrow night. After they hung up, Victor stood at his window, looking down at the city spread below, all light and shadow and infinite complexity. He thought about his father's warning, about vulnerability and leverage, about the costs of caring in a building designed to commodify feeling. But he also thought about Isla's voice, the trust implicit in her agreement, the possibility of building something authentic in the middle of performance. It was worth the risk. He hoped. Part 7, the charity event. The Aurora Heights Charity Gala was an annual tradition, hosted in the building's ballroom on floor 45. It was ostensibly about philanthropy, raising money for various worthy causes, demonstrating the residents' commitment to social responsibility. But everyone understood its true purpose, performance. The gala was where Aurora Heights displayed its power, wealth, and social cohesion to the outside world and to itself. Attendance was essentially mandatory for anyone who mattered in the building's hierarchy, which meant Victor would be there, performing his role as heir and host, and which meant Isla would have to decide whether to attend. They had been seeing each other for 2 weeks. Quiet dinners outside the building, long conversations in private, a careful, deliberate building of trust and connection. They had kept it hidden, not from shame, but from a mutual desire to protect something fragile from Aurora Heights' harsh scrutiny. But the gala would test that protection. "You don't have to go," Victor said. They were in his penthouse, her first time there, sitting on the terrace with the city spread below them. "I know it's a lot of exposure. If I don't go, people will speculate about why," Isla said. "And if I do go, they'll watch to see how we interact. Probably, so we're trapped either way." "Welcome to my entire life," Victor said with a wry smile. Isla leaned back in her chair, studying him. Over the past 2 weeks, she had discovered layers to Victor Van Seren that the building never saw. His dry humor, his frustration with family obligations, his genuine interest in architecture and urban planning, his unexpected kindness, the way he listened completely, without the performance of listening that characterized most Aurora Heights conversations. She had also discovered that she was falling for him, which terrified her and felt inevitable in equal measure. "What if we went together?" she asked, publicly, deliberately. Victor looked at her carefully. "That would be making a statement. I know. The entire building would know we're together. There would be scrutiny, questions, assumptions." "I know," Isla repeated, "but I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of letting fear and other people's opinions dictate how I live. You asked me to be visible on my terms. That's what I'm choosing." Victor reached across the space between them, taking her hand. The gesture was simple, but in the context of Aurora Heights, where even hand-holding was analyzed for meaning, it felt revolutionary. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No, but I'm choosing it anyway." "Then we'll do it right. No sneaking in separately, no careful distance. We arrive together, we stay together. We show the building exactly who we are." "And what are we?" Victor smiled, the expression transforming his usually controlled features into something warm and genuine. "We're 2 people who found something real in the middle of performance, and we're not apologizing for it." The night of the gala, Isla dressed with deliberate care. She chose a gown that was elegant but not ostentatious, sophisticated without trying too hard. Deep blue silk that moved like water, simple jewelry, hair styled in a way that suggested effort without obsession. She wanted to look like herself, not like someone performing the role of Victor Van Seren's partner. When he picked her up from her apartment, his reaction made every careful choice worthwhile. "You're stunning," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself." Victor wore a tuxedo with the casual perfection of someone who had been wearing them since childhood. But there was something different in his carriage tonight. Less performance, more presence. He looked like a man who had decided to stop hiding. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "Absolutely not. Let's go anyway." They took the elevator to floor 45 together, and Isla felt her heart rate increase with each floor. By the time the doors opened onto the ballroom level, she was genuinely nervous, her palms slightly damp where it rested on Victor's arm. He felt the tension and leaned close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We can still turn around." "No, we do this." The ballroom was already crowded, filled with Aurora Heights' elite in their expensive clothes and practiced smiles. Conversation hummed beneath soft music. Champagne flowed. Waiters circulated with elegant efficiency. It was beautiful and hollow, exactly like everything else in the building. But when Victor and Isla entered together, conversation didn't stop. That would have been too obvious, but it shifted. A change in pitch, a redirection of attention. People noticed. Serena Cho saw them first and smiled slightly, raising her glass in subtle acknowledgement. Mara was less subtle, her face breaking into a delighted grin. Jackson looked surprised, but approving. Others watched, with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation to barely concealed displeasure. And in the corner, Marcus Hendricks stared with an expression Isla couldn't quite read. Anger, mixed with something that might have been regret, or might have been wounded pride. "Here we go," Victor murmured. They moved through the room together, and Victor was brilliant. He introduced Isla to people she didn't know, included her in conversations, made it clear through 1,000 small gestures that she was with him by choice, as an equal, not as an accessory. He existed. He was still performing. That was unavoidable in Aurora Heights, but he was performing authenticity, and that made all sense. Isla found herself relaxing slightly, remembering how to navigate contractual situations with grace. Termination and diminished, disappear. But before that, she had been good at this. Investment, the charm, media group, ability to hold her own message, if full of powerful people. She had just forgotten. About an hour into the event, Victor was pulled aside by his father for introductions to be rager donors. Expression, Tranla found herself briefly like everything else, champagne in hand, watching the crowd. "You look happy." She turned to find Serena beside her, elegant and observant as always. "I am," Isla admitted, surprisingly. "Victor is different with you, more present." "How do you know?" "I pay attention to composition," Serena said. "And the composition of Victor Van Seren plus you is very different from Victor Van Seren plus anyone else. Less performance, more truth. Is that good or dangerous in Aurora Heights?" "Probably both." Serena smiled. "But worth it, I think. Truth usually is." Before Isla could respond, Marcus Hendricks appeared. She felt her body tense automatically, but she kept her expression neutral. "Isla," he said. His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. "Congratulations on YOUR Chinese letter, Chinese letter. I'm sorry. Your upgrade from floor 32 to the penthouse level. That's quite a promotion." The insult was clear. The suggestion that she had simply traded up, found a wealthier patron, repeated the same pattern at a higher altitude. It was designed to wound, to reduce her to transaction. Isla felt anger rise, but before she could respond, Victor appeared at her side. His presence was subtle but unmistakable, a quiet assertion of partnership. "Hendrix," Victor said. His tone was pleasant, but ice underneath. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Victor Van Seren. I know who you are." "Good. Then you know that I take the safety and dignity of everyone in this building very seriously, especially those I care about." The threat was elegant, wrapped in civility, but absolutely clear. "I trust we understand each other." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he was smart enough to recognize when he was outmatched. "Of course. Enjoy your evening." He walked away, and Isla released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said to Victor. "You would have handled him perfectly without me." "Maybe, but I didn't have to." That was new. Victor took her hand, the gesture public and deliberate. "You'll never have to handle anything alone again. Not if you don't want to." Isla felt emotion tighten her throat. She had spent so long believing that independence meant isolation, that protecting herself required distance. But Victor was offering something different: partnership without possession, support without control. It was terrifying and wonderful. The rest of the evening unfolded with surprising ease. They danced, talked, laughed, existed together in the center of Aurora Heights' attention without shrinking from it. And slowly, Isla realized that the scrutiny felt different when she had chosen it, when it was the cost of something real rather than the consequence of something secret. Near midnight, they stepped out onto one of the building's terraces, needing air and relative privacy. The city glittered below them, endless light against darkness. "How do you feel?" Victor asked. "Exposed, visible, strangely free. Any regrets?" Isla turned to face him fully. In the soft light from the ballroom, Victor looked younger, more vulnerable, the careful masks he wore inside stripped away. "None," she said. "You." "Just one." "What?" "That I didn't do this sooner. Didn't claim what I wanted instead of performing what was expected." He kissed her then, soft and deliberate, and Isla felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble. She had spent months protecting herself, building barriers, choosing safety over risk. But this feeling, this connection, this man was worth the vulnerability. When they pulled apart, Victor smiled. "The building is definitely talking about us now. Let them talk. You've changed your mind about gossip. I've changed my mind about hiding. There's a difference." They stood together on the terrace, looking out at the city, and Isla felt something shift in her understanding of Aurora Heights. The building was still manipulative, still full of performance and power games and calculated relationships. But it was also full of possibility, of real connections hiding between the facades, of people trying to find authenticity in the middle of artifice. It was still dangerous, still complicated, still a place where desire and power collided, with often devastating consequences. But for the first time since moving to Aurora Heights, Isla felt like she was living rather than merely surviving. And that made all the difference. Part 8: Consequences and Choices. The morning after the gala, the gossip network of Aurora Heights worked at maximum efficiency. Photos circulated Victor and Isla dancing, talking, touching, existing together with unmistakable intimacy. The images were everywhere by breakfast, discussed in elevators, analyzed over coffee, dissected in group chats. But the tone of the gossip was different from before. It wasn't speculation or innuendo. It was acknowledgement. Victor Van Seren and Isla Monroe were together, publicly and deliberately, and that reality shifted the building's social landscape in subtle but significant ways. Some residents were delighted, finding the romance appealing in a building often cynical about such things. Others were calculating, wondering how this relationship might affect building politics and social hierarchies. A few were openly disapproving, believing that Victor should have chosen someone from their own tier of wealth and influence. And Marcus Hendricks was furious. He made the mistake of expressing that fury to the wrong person, a business associate who also happened to be friendly with the Van Seren family. Within hours, word reached Victor that Marcus was making veiled threats, suggesting he had information about Isla that would provide important context about her character. Victor's response was swift and comprehensive. He called a meeting with building management, his father, and the building's legal counsel. He laid out Marcus's pattern of behavior, the leaked photograph, the implied threats, the attempted intimidation at the gala. He presented it not as personal grievance, but as a violation of Aurora Heights' community standards, specifically the harassment and privacy policies outlined in every residence lease. The evidence was clear. The pattern was undeniable, and the Van Seren family's influence ensured the outcome. Marcus Hendricks received formal notice that his lease would not be renewed. He had 6 months to find alternative housing. The message was clear. Aurora Heights protected its own, and Isla was now unquestionably included in that protection. When Victor told Isla about the decision, her reaction surprised him. "That's going to cause problems," she said. They were in her apartment, having breakfast on her small balcony. "For Marcus, yes. For you, people will say you're using your position, showing favoritism, punishing residents for personal reasons. Let them say it." Victor's voice was calm but firm. What Marcus did was harassment. If he had targeted anyone else, the outcome would be the same. Would it? The question hung in the air. They both knew the answer was complicated. Aurora Heights had always operated on unwritten rules about power and protection, and those rules didn't apply equally to everyone. Maybe not, Victor admitted. But that's part of what needs to change. This building has operated too long on the assumption that wealth buys immunity from consequences. It doesn't. Or at least, it shouldn't. Isla reached across the table, taking his hand. I appreciate what you're doing, more than I can say. But I need you to understand something. What? I don't want to be someone you have to protect. I want to be someone you choose to stand beside. There's a difference. I know there is. Do you? Because from the outside, this looks like you're using your power to fight my battles. And that's not partnership, Victor. That's patronage. Her words landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Victor sat back, considering. He had acted from genuine care and justified anger, but he hadn't fully considered how his intervention might look to Isla, or how it might affect their dynamic. You're right, he said. I should have consulted you before taking action. I'm not saying you shouldn't have done it. Marcus deserves consequences, but I should have been part of the decision about what those consequences would be. I'm sorry. Isla smiled slightly. You don't apologize much, do you? Not historically, but I'm learning. We're both learning. That's the whole point. They finished breakfast in comfortable silence, and Victor found himself thinking about power in new ways. He had spent his entire life wielding influence without questioning its implications, using it to shape outcomes according to his preferences. But Isla was showing him that power was most meaningful when it was shared, when decisions were made together rather than imposed. It was a lesson he desperately needed. Later that week, the building's social ecosystem began to stabilize around the new reality. Victor and Isla were an established couple, visible and unapologetic. They had dinner with Mara and Jackson, who had recently begun their own complicated relationship. They attended building events together. They existed in Aurora Heights as partners, equal and obvious. And slowly, Isla began to reclaim aspects of herself she had suppressed. Her social confidence returned. She started accepting invitations she would have previously declined. She reconnected with residents she had avoided after the Marcus situation. She was still cautious, still protective of her privacy, but she was no longer hiding. One evening, about a month after the gala, Victor found Isla in the Floor 28 gym. She was there later than usual, her workout intense and focused. Bad day, he asked, settling onto the mat beside her. Reflective day, Isla corrected. I was thinking about how much has changed. For better or worse. Better, definitely better, but also more complicated. How so? Isla sat up, looking at him directly. I spent months after Marcus trying to become invisible, trying to protect myself by disappearing. And then you came along and made that impossible. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not complaining. I'm grateful. But I realized something today. What? That visibility isn't the problem. Shame is. I was hiding because I felt ashamed of what happened with Marcus, like it was somehow my fault that I trusted someone who didn't deserve it. But it wasn't my fault. He was the one who lied, who treated me as disposable, who tried to buy my silence. That's absolutely true. I know that intellectually. But I'm finally starting to believe it emotionally. And that changes everything. Victor pulled her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the solidity of her presence. You're extraordinary, you know that. I'm learning, Isla said, with help. They sat together in the gym, surrounded by equipment and glass, and the glittering city beyond. And Victor felt something close to peace. Aurora Heights was still complicated, still full of performance and power games and calculated relationships. But in the middle of all that complexity, he had found something genuine, and he intended to keep it. Epilogue, new routines. 3 months after the charity gala, the Floor 28 gym had become a different kind of space for Isla and Victor. It was where they had first really noticed each other, where their relationship had begun in careful glances and guarded conversations. Now it was simply part of their routine, a place they came together, not to perform or hide, but to exist. They arrived most mornings around 6:30, a compromise between Victor's early schedule and Isla's preference for slightly more sleep. They worked out separately, but nearby, comfortable in the proximity without needing constant interaction. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply coexisted, content in the parallel rhythm of shared space. Other residents had adjusted to their presence. The gossip had faded into acceptance. Victor and Isla were simply part of Aurora Heights now, neither scandal nor spectacle, just two people who had found each other in an unlikely place. One morning, as they were finishing their workouts, Jackson Rains appeared with Mara. The four of them had become something like friends, united by the experience of trying to build real relationships in a building designed for performance. We're getting breakfast, Mara announced. You're joining us. Is that a request or a command? Victor asked. With Mara, is there ever a difference? Jackson said, grinning. They ended up in the building's cafe, claiming a corner table with a view of the city. Conversation flowed easily, teasing, laughter, genuine connection. At one point, Mara leaned over to Isla and whispered, You look happy. I am, Isla admitted. Good, you deserve it. After breakfast, as they rode the elevator back to their respective floors, Victor turned to Isla. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you still think about leaving Aurora Heights? Moving somewhere quieter, less complicated? Isla considered the question seriously. She had thought about it, especially in the early days with Victor, when the scrutiny felt overwhelming. But that was before she had understood something important. Aurora Heights isn't the problem, she said. It's just a building. A complicated building full of complicated people, but still just architecture and glass and steel. The problem was letting it define me, letting other people's perceptions control my choices. And now I define myself. I choose how I exist here. The building doesn't get that power anymore. Victor smiled, the expression full of warmth and pride. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just didn't know me well enough to notice. Fair point. The elevator reached Isla's floor. Before stepping out, she kissed Victor briefly. Dinner tonight. Your place or mine? Mine I'll cook. You don't have to. I want to. Besides, you cook for me all the time. I need to prove I can do more than order takeout. After the doors closed, Isla walked to her apartment, feeling the sunlight stream through the hallway windows. She thought about the past months, about how dramatically her life had changed since those early morning workouts, when Victor Van Seren was just a handsome stranger invading her sanctuary. She had been so determined to stay invisible, so convinced that safety required isolation. But Victor had shown her something different. That visibility chosen was different from visibility imposed. That partnership could enhance rather than diminish identity. That vulnerability was strength rather than weakness. Aurora Heights was still complicated, still full of gossip and power games and calculated relationships. But it was also full of possibility, of people trying to find authenticity, of connections that transcended the building's cynicism. And Isla was no longer afraid of it. She was finally fully living in it. In his penthouse, Victor stood at the window, looking down at the gym on floor 28 far below. He thought about the morning he had first walked in and seen Isla, focused and determined, building strength through discipline. He thought about how that moment had changed everything, had challenged assumptions he hadn't known he held, had opened possibilities he hadn't realized he wanted. He had spent his entire life in Aurora Heights, had always assumed he understood exactly what the building was and what it required. But Isla had shown him something different, that even in a space designed for performance, authenticity was possible. That power was most meaningful when shared. That control meant nothing if it cost connection. He pulled out his phone and texted her, "I'm falling in love with you. Just thought you should know." The response came quickly. Past tense is inaccurate. Present progressive is more precise. Also same. Victor laughed, feeling joy that was simple and uncomplicated and entirely real. Aurora Heights would continue being Aurora Heights, glamorous and dangerous, seductive and complicated, full of secrets and desire and power. But for the first time in his life, Victor understood that the building didn't define him. He defined himself, and he chose Isla. In the gym below, new residents were beginning their morning routines, building strength, pursuing discipline, seeking control. The equipment hummed. The mirrors reflected beautiful bodies and practiced expressions. The city sprawled beyond the windows, endless and indifferent. And somewhere in the building's complex architecture, other stories were beginning, other attractions forming, other secrets developing, other lives tangling in the particular way that only Aurora Heights could create. The tower watched. The elevator rose and fell. The rumors traveled. But on floor 28, where it had all begun, the treadmills simply continued their steady rhythm, patient and impartial, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Because in Aurora Heights, there was always a next chapter, always another secret, always another desire, waiting to reshape lives. The building guaranteed it. End of Audiobook 5. Jim and Are You Amores?